She was a talented 24-year-old baker, constantly humiliated for her weight and considered the town's laughingstock. But when the vampire lord tasted her sweets and discovered she could create flavors that awakened ancestral memories, no one knew that culinary encounter would awaken supernatural cooking powers and transform both their destinies forever. The town of Whitestone was one of those small places where everyone knew each other's secrets, but where the Christian kindness preached on Sundays dissolved on Monday in the face of the gratuitous cruelty that small-minded people exercised over those they considered different. The narrow cobblestone streets constantly echoed with venomous whispers and malicious laughter, creating a symphony of gossip that spread from house to house like a social plague. Disapproving glances were common currency, passed from window to window whenever someone deemed unsuitable dared to walk the town's main streets. The bell of St. Benedict's Bakery rang every morning at 5 o'clock, announcing the start of another day of hard work, but also serving as a signal for malicious comments to begin circulating through neighboring houses. "There goes Madalena, waking up the whole town with her noise," housewives would grumble, though they were the first to appear at the bakery door when the aroma of fresh bread began spreading through the morning air. Cruel whispers, mixed with the clinking of cake pans being organized, creating a soundtrack of hard work, seasoned with social prejudice. The smell emanating from the small bakery was a sensory poem that brutally contrasted with the town's human coldness. Golden French bread emerging from brick ovens, condensed milk sweets, caramelizing slowly, cassava biscuits that filled the air with a homey aroma that made even the cruelest residents salivate involuntarily. Mixed with these celestial aromas was always the honest smell of hard work, sweat, of hands that kneaded dough since before dawn, of bodies that dedicated themselves entirely to the art of nourishing others, even when those others responded only with contempt. The light pulsing through the bakery's fogged windows came from brick ovens that never completely went out, creating a golden and cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the weak and economized lanterns of the rest of the town. It was as if inside there existed a parallel world, where magic happened through the alchemy between flour, eggs, and love, while outside reality remained gray and cruel. At the center of this aromatic universe was Madalena, a woman with a generously rounded body, with full breasts that swayed rhythmically while she kneaded dough, wide hips that moved in an unconscious dance during work, and soft yet surprisingly strong arms, molded by years of heavy kitchen work. Her simple clothes, always a faded floral dress covered by a white apron, perpetually speckled with flour, told the story of someone who lived to serve, even when that service wasn't recognized. Her hands, however, were pure poetry in motion-skilled fingers that could transform simple ingredients into edible works of art. Calloused palms that knew exactly the ideal temperature for each dough, nails always clean despite constant work with flour and sugar. Madalena's emotional state was a complex mosaic of constant shame and unshakable passion. During the day, when she needed to serve customers, her brown eyes automatically looked away, avoiding eye contact that might reveal how much the cruel words affected her. But when she was alone in her kitchen, especially during the silent hours of dawn, a hidden force emerged. Her hands moved with supernatural confidence, as if channeling culinary knowledge that transcended any learned recipe. It was in these moments that she created her masterpieces. Sweets that had impossible to explain flavors, combinations that should be strange but became perfect under her touch. Madalena's social situation was cruel isolation disguised as economic necessity. The entire town bought her products after all. No one could deny she was the best baker within a 100-mile radius, but they treated their purchases as shameful transactions, as if they were doing a favor instead of acquiring something extraordinary. Her talent was simultaneously recognized and despised, a cruel contradiction that forced her to live in a bubble of loneliness, where her only true companions were the ovens, recipes, and aromas she created. "I don't know how she has the nerve to eat her own sweets," commented Donna Francisca in the morning line, her voice loud enough for Madalena to hear every word. "If I were her, I'd eat only salad until I got thin like normal people." Other customers laughed discreetly, grabbed their warm breads, and left without even thanking, as if they were doing a social favor by tolerating the existence of the fat baker who, unfortunately, made the best sweets in the region. The humiliation came on a Saturday afternoon, when Madalena was carrying a tray of her famous gourmet brigadeiros to the Central Square Fair. It was the monthly event where all the town's merchants gathered to sell their goods, and she had spent 3 days preparing her specialties, hoping that maybe, this time, she could finally be treated with the respect her talent deserved. The square was packed with strolling families, children running between stalls, and the cheerful sound of conversations and negotiations created a festive atmosphere that brutally contrasted with what was about to happen. Madalena had set up her small table in the shade, carefully organizing her sweets on glass trays that reflected the afternoon sun, when a group of the town's teenagers approached with smiles that promised cruelty. "Look, airy folks," said Junior, the mayor's son, his voice laden with performative malice. "The mobile bakery has arrived. Does anyone here have the courage to buy sweets from someone who clearly eats everything before selling?" The group's laughter echoed through the square, attracting curious glances and some complicit smiles from adults who should have known better. "Seriously, how can someone so fat be a baker?" continued one of the girls, pretending to whisper but speaking loud enough for half the square to hear. "It's like having an alcoholic selling drinks or an addict selling drugs. No self-control at all." More cruel laughter spread through the group, and Madalena felt her cheeks burn with shame as she tried to maintain composure. "Must eat half of what she makes," added another boy. "That's why the prices are so high. She has to compensate for the loss of eating her own stock." The comment provoked a wave of laughter that spread beyond the original group, contaminating other passersby who stopped to watch the free public humiliation spectacle. What began as cruel words quickly escalated to something more sadistic. Junior pretended to trip purposefully at Madalena's table, causing an entire tray of gourmet brigadeiros to fly through the air and splatter on the square's stone floor. Sweets that had taken hours to be carefully prepared transformed into a dirty brown mass, mixed with dirt and dry leaves. "Oops, sorry," he said with a fake smile. "But look at the bright side, now you won't be tempted to eat them." The cruelty of the comment cut like a blade, and Madalena felt hot tears beginning to form in her eyes. As the group walked away, still laughing and making malicious comments, Madalena knelt on the cold square floor, trying to collect the pieces of her destroyed sweets. Her tears dripped silently into the dirt, each drop loaded with years of accumulated humiliation, shattered dreams, and pain that seemed impossible to heal. People passed around her, some looking with pity, others with indifference, but no one offering help. It was that night, when Madalena had returned to her bakery and cried until she had no more tears, that he appeared. Lysander, a creature of absolute refinement and ancestral palates, with deep violet eyes that had savored delicacies from lost civilizations, and elegant presence that made the very air around him vibrate with millennial sophistication, glided through the shadows of the deserted street, as if made from darkness itself. He knew those unique flavors he had detected in the air were more than simple human cuisine, but he had to maintain his distant pose, the demanding nature he had cultivated through centuries of refined gastronomic experiences. He didn't need to break locks or force doors. Like sophisticated mist, he passed through the bakery window cracks, slowly materializing among the counters still covered with flour and ovens that exhaled residual heat. His presence carried an impossible-to-ignore magnetism of Madalena, exhausted by the day's humiliation, felt every cell in her body react to the aura of ancestral power emanating from him. On the counter, there remained a small dish of her special brigadeiros, those she prepared with a secret recipe that included a pinch of true Ceylon, cinnamon and a few drops of vanilla essence she prepared herself. Lysander approached the dish with the reverence of a sommelier before a rare wine, his pale and elegant fingers delicately picking up one of the sweets. When the brigadeiro touched his lips, something extraordinary happened. For 500 years, Lysander had experienced all the delicacies humanity could offer: Roman emperor banquets, French court desserts, spices that cost more than entire kingdoms. But in that simple sweet made by a humiliated baker in a forgotten town, he found something he had searched for centuries, flavors that awakened memories he didn't even know still existed. It was as if each ingredient told a story. The chocolate spoke of distant lands and lost loves. The condensed milk whispered about cozy homes and mothers he had never known. The cinnamon transported him to Oriental bazaars, where he had walked when still young. But beyond the flavors, there was something more, a golden energy pulsing through the sweet. As if the creator had unconsciously infused each brigadeiro with fragments of her own soul. Madalena, who had been cleaning ovens in the bakery's back, felt a presence that made her skin crawl in a way that had nothing to do with fear. When she turned and saw the elegant figure tasting her sweets with a reverence no one had ever shown for her food, she knew her life was about to change forever. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any words. It was as if two souls who had spent their entire lives searching for something had finally found it. He, a supernatural aristocrat seeking flavors that could touch his immortal soul. She, a culinary artist seeking someone who truly understood the magic she put into each recipe. The transition from Madalena's small bakery in Whitestone to Lysander's castle was like crossing the portal between two completely distinct gastronomic universes. One moment she was cleaning flour from worn wooden counters. The next she found herself in a kitchen that seemed to have emerged from the most impossible dreams of any world chef. The space extended over 200 square meters, with volcanic stone ovens that maintained perfect temperatures through ancestral magic. Carrara marble counters that never lost their ideal coolness for working doughs, and a pantry that resembled more a cave of culinary treasures. The contrast with her previous life was so brutal that Madalena needed to lean on one of the golden counters to avoid collapsing. Where before she had only basic ingredients bought at the city's wholesale market, now there were infinite shelves filled with spices she had only read about in old culinary books. Saffron from Afghanistan, Madagascar vanilla still in pods, Himalayan pink salt, Telekari black pepper, Ceylon cinnamon that cost more per gram than some precious metals, Belgian chocolate from private plantations, exotic bird eggs, flowers ground from grains that grew only under moonlight. It was as if all the ingredients from a confectioner's dreams had materialized in a single infinite pantry. "Welcome to the Eternal Kitchen," said a refined voice with a slightly French accent. Madalena turned to find Beaumont, the castle's head butler and vampire sommelier for over 300 years. His appearance was a work of art, of supernatural elegance, silver hair styled with military precision, blue eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate the quality of everything around them, and clothes that cost more than Madalena's entire bakery. "I am responsible for supervising all culinary operations of the castle. And I must warn you, mademoiselle, that our standards are ... demanding." Lysander remained in an observational position, studying every reaction of Madalena with the intensity of a gastronomic critic evaluating a dish. "This is how it works here." His voice cut through the air with aristocratic authority. "If you want to cook for supernatural royalty, you must learn that culinary perfection requires absolute sacrifice. Every ingredient must be treated like a sacred relic, every technique executed like an ancestral ritual." The first days were a whirlwind of adaptation that tested every fiber of Madalena's determination. Discovering that some ingredients were literally magical, like phoenix eggs that needed to be cracked only under consecrated candlelight, or unicorn milk that curdled if exposed to negative emotions, was just the beginning of her challenges. There was sugar that changed color, according to the moon, honey that never crystallized because it was collected by immortal bees, and fruits that maintained the exact flavor of the moment they were picked decades ago. "I already told you that you must control the magic portions, not let them dominate the natural flavor," Lysander corrected her when Madalena added too much mystic rose essence to a cake, making the dough begin to glow with its own light. His voice maintained aristocratic coldness, but his eyes observed her with an intensity she could feel even when her back was turned. Magic should enhance flavor, not replace it. But the cruelest challenge wasn't the supernatural ingredients, it was the devastating insecurity Madalena felt, seeing herself surrounded by vampires, whose beauty was literally supernatural. Beaumont moved with the grace of a dancer, every gesture calculated to demonstrate absolute elegance. Lysander seemed to have been sculpted by divine artists, every line of his face a work of art that defied human imperfection. And there she was, with her wide hips, full arms, simple clothes that now seemed like rags before the sophistication surrounding her. During a particularly difficult lesson about preparing ambrosia soufflé, a dessert that needed to literally capture the essence of happiness, Madalena spilled nectar syrup on an ancestral marble counter. Lysander's rebuke was so icy that she felt her cheeks burn with shame. "Incompetence is unacceptable," he said, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "This castle has already witnessed enough human mediocrity." Silent tears streamed down Madalena's face as she cleaned up the waste, each drop loaded with the familiar feeling of not being good enough. But something inside her refused to break. She wouldn't give up, she thought, cleaning her trembling hands on her apron. Not after finding someone who finally valued her true talent, even if in such a demanding way. What Madalena didn't realize was that Lysander constantly observed her, not with disapproval, but with growing fascination. There was something in the way she worked even when nervous, even when making mistakes that he hadn't encountered in centuries. Her hands moved with natural intuition that transcended any taught technique. When she thought no one was looking, small miracles happened. A cake that should have failed turned out perfect. A cream that should have curdled reached ideal consistency. Seasonings that shouldn't combine created impossible harmonies. Beaumont also noticed, observing with growing interest, how the castle's lord found excuses to pass through the kitchen 3 times more than normal. "Interesting," he murmured in French, adjusting wines that would accompany the next meal. "Très intéressant." Madalena's determination grew proportionally to the challenges. Each mastered recipe, each understood supernatural ingredient, each moment where she managed to create something that made Lysander's eyes shine with silent approval, were victories she carried like armor against the doubts that haunted her during lonely nights. In the luxurious guest room she now called home, the crisis came in the 5th week, when Madalena was trying to master the most complex recipe in supernatural cuisine, the 7 Dimensions cake, a legendary dessert that should simultaneously capture flavors from different planes of existence. The batter required phoenix eggs beaten under moonlight, flour blessed by ancestral druids, and a fermentation technique that involves singing melodies in dead languages while stirring the mixture counterclockwise. For 3 consecutive hours, Madalena had tried to make the batter achieve the necessary ethereal consistency, but each attempt resulted in failure. The first time, the batter literally disappeared into a parallel dimension when she mispronounced an archaic word. On the second attempt, the cake came to life and tried to escape from the oven. On the third try, the dessert exploded in a shower of edible stars that stuck to the kitchen ceiling like a sweet and sticky constellation. Lysander watched all the failures in silence, elegantly leaning against a black granite counter, his violet eyes fixed on Madalena's every movement. There was no impatience in his posture, no irritation, just intense curiosity, as if he were studying a rare phenomenon he couldn't completely understand. His pale hands occasionally drummed against the marble, but that was the only sign he wasn't completely impassive. "I can't do it," Madalena finally collapsed, her trembling hands covered with a shimmering mixture that seemed to contain rainbow fragments. Tears of frustration streamed down her face as she looked at the destroyed counter, filled with wasted precious ingredients. "Maybe you were right from the beginning. Maybe I really don't have what it takes to cook at this level." It was then that something changed in Lysander's posture. For the first time since her arrival, he moved away from his observational position and approached the counter where Madalena was working. When he stood behind her, his presence was like an aura of concentrated power. She could feel the supernatural cold emanating from his body, mixed with an indefinable aroma that was part ancient cedar, part exotic spices, and something completely unique that confused her senses. "This is how you awaken ancestral flavors," he said, his hands covering hers as he guided her movements over the batter. His touch was surprisingly gentle, long and elegant fingers that moved with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. "You must feel the energy of each ingredient, but with true passion. It's not just culinary technique, it's like making love to the flavors themselves. You need to surrender completely to the process. Let your soul mix with the essence of each element. Under his guidance, Madalena felt something extraordinary happen. The batter began reacting not just to her hands, but to her emotions, to her deepest desires to create something truly special. It was as if her insecurity and determination were being literally incorporated into the recipe, creating layers of flavor that transcended any learned technique. "Do you feel that?" Lysander murmured near her ear, his voice carrying a softness she had never heard before. "The batter is responding to your essence. This is something that can't be taught. It's a gift you've carried since birth, for the first time." Their conversation derived from technical training to something more personal. "Food," said Lysander, still guiding her hands as they worked together, "is the only form of magic that can literally transport someone through time. Each flavor carries memories. Each aroma can resurrect people who died centuries ago. You speak like someone who knows what it is to hunger for something more than food," Madalena observed, feeling a connection that went beyond cuisine. "Perhaps centuries of existence have taught me that some flavors are more important than blood," he admitted, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Madalena's heart race. "There was a time when I believed eternity could be sweet instead of just long." It was in this moment of openness that his emotional barriers flexed enough for him to share an ancient memory. Through their physical connection, Madalena could glimpse fragments of banquets in 17th century European courts. Sumptuous tables loaded with delicacies that cost more than entire kingdoms, and an ethereally beautiful female figure, Isabel, a mortal chef who had conquered his immortal heart through dishes that were true works of art. She created desserts that made angels weep with envy. Lysander continued, his voice gaining a melancholic quality that made even the surrounding air seem heavier. Chocolate mousse that captured the essence of first love. Tarts that tasted like eternal springs. Creams that contained pure happiness crystallized in sugar. "What happened to her?" Madalena asked softly, though part of her already guessed the answer would be painful. It was Beaumont who emerged from the shadows at that moment, as he always did when he sensed important revelations were happening. His elegant hands carried a silver tray with rare wines, but his blue eyes were fixed on Lysander with an expression that mixed loyalty and concern. "It's time she knew the complete truth," said the vampire butler, placing the tray on a side counter. "About Isabel, and about why the master became so demanding with culinary perfection." Lysander stepped slightly away from Madalena, the familiar coldness returning like a defensive mask. "Beaumont... No, monsieur, she needs to understand." Beaumont addressed Madalena directly, his centuries of experience evident in the gravity of his expression. "Isabel didn't die of natural causes, mademoiselle. She was poisoned by a rival chef who couldn't bear to see a mortal win the heart of a vampire lord. The poison was mixed into one of her own dishes, a chocolate cake that should have been her masterpiece." The silence that followed was loaded with painful understanding. Madalena finally understood why Lysander was so obsessed with perfection. Why each ingredient was tested multiple times. Why he maintained emotional distance from anyone who entered his kitchen. It wasn't aristocratic arrogance, it was deep trauma that had haunted him for centuries. 3 nights after the revelation about Isabel, Madalena spent hours in the castle's secret pantry, studying ancestral recipes and impossible combinations until she found exactly what she was looking for. She discovered through Beaumont's culinary diaries that Lysander had mentioned decades ago. A dessert from his mortal childhood, a French bread pudding that his governess made on cold winter mornings, seasoned with cinnamon and drizzled with golden rum sauce. For 2 days, Madalena worked secretly, adapting the simple recipe with supernatural ingredients that would amplify associated memories without purporting the comforting essence of the dish. She used bread made with wheat grown under moonlight, enchanted swan eggs that conferred impossible creaminess, cinnamon from century-old trees that carried echoes of past generations, and rum aged in barrels that had absorbed dreams of sailors lost at sea. But the secret ingredient was something no cookbook could teach: every movement, every pinch, Every minute in the oven was seasoned with the genuine desire to bring comfort to someone who had forgotten what it meant to be consoled through food. It was a tribute not only to Isabel's memory but to the boy Lysander had been before. Centuries of loss hardened his heart. On the night she finally presented the dessert, the great hall had been prepared intimately, just a table for two, illuminated by candles Beaumont had chosen specifically because they were from the era of Lysander's childhood. When the vampire lord descended the stairs and saw the preparation, his violet eyes widened with surprise that quickly gave way to suspicion. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice carried no irritation. There was something close to vulnerability. "A memory," Madalena responded softly, serving the still warm pudding on porcelain she had chosen for reminding her of the simple dishes from her own childhood. "I thought maybe you were tired of always eating alone with ghosts from the past." Aqui está a tradução completa do final épico da história, mantendo toda a magia culinária e emocional. When Lysander tasted the first spoonful, something extraordinary happened to his expression. For 500 years, he had experienced the most sophisticated cuisines eternity could offer. But in that simple dessert, he found something he didn't expect, not just the exact flavor of his lost childhood, but the sensation of being cared for, nourished, loved through food. It was as if Madalena had managed to capture the essence of what it meant to have a home. "How did you know?" he asked, and for the first time his voice carried a raw emotion that made Madalena's heart race. "Everyone has a flavor that takes them back home," she said. "I just needed to pay attention to what your eyes searched for when you thought no one was looking." In the weeks that followed, a culinary intimacy began developing between them. Lysander started including Madalena in activities beyond training, harmonization sessions where they tasted century-old wines with small plates she created, specifically to enhance each note, walks through the castle's night gardens, where magical herbs grew that she learned to use in her recipes, and long conversations in the kitchen during the silent hours of dawn, when the rest of the world slept and only they existed in the golden universe of lit ovens. During one of these gastronomic sessions, while preparing an elaborate dinner together for vampiric court visitors, physical proximity became impossible to ignore. Madalena was seasoning a sauce when Lysander positioned himself behind her to reach a spice jar on the high shelf. When he leaned over her, his chest brushed against her back, and his masculine scent eater spices, and something indefinably aristocratic enveloped her completely. "Sorry," he murmured, but didn't immediately step away. His cold breath against her nape created a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature, and everything to do with the tension that had been building during weeks of careful proximity. "It's okay," Madalena responded, but her voice came out huskier than normal. When she turned to face him, she discovered he hadn't stepped back as far as he should have, leaving only a few centimeters between them. She could see every detail of his violet eyes, every aristocratic line of his face, every tension in his jaw that suggested an internal struggle he was trying to hide. The sexual tension pulsing between them was seasoned with gastronomic elements that made everything more intense. Each breath brought the aroma of dishes they had created together. Each heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of spices being ground. Each moment of proximity was amplified by the flavors they had shared. It was as if they were getting to know each other through palates instead of words, building intimacy through recipes instead of confessions. "This is complicated," Lysander finally said, but his hands moved to the counter on each side of Madalena's body, gently trapping her against the marble. "I know," she responded, but didn't try to move away. "But maybe some complications are worth it." It was then that his defenses rose again, aristocratic familiarity, returning like familiar armor. "Don't get your hopes up, you know," he said, stepping back slightly. "I'm still the same demanding aristocrat as always. My expectations haven't changed just because you make a decent pudding." Madalena studied him for a long moment, her flour-dusted hands finding his face in a surprisingly bold caress. "I know," she said softly, her fingers tracing his jawline, "but sometimes even the most refined palates need someone who cooks with true love instead of just perfect technique." "What if love isn't enough to season reality?" he asked, his voice reduced to a vulnerable whisper. What if it's exactly the ingredient that's been missing from all your recipes? She replied, pressing her forehead against his. For the first time in 5 centuries, Lysander allowed himself to believe that perhaps there was something sweeter than perfection and that maybe, just maybe, he had found the chef capable of teaching his immortal heart to savor love again. The moon was at its highest point when Lysander led Madalena to the most sacred place in his entire culinary domain, the ancestral kitchen, a secret chamber located in the castle's depths that only 3 people had known over 5 centuries. Unlike the main kitchen where she trained daily, this was a space of pure culinary power, where magical ovens carved from volcanic stone maintained eternal flames that never went out, and immortal spices grew in hanging gardens that defied the laws of botany. The environment was permeated with gastronomic magic so dense that the very aromas came alive. Cinnamon fragrances danced in the air like golden serpents. Vanilla perfume created ethereal clouds that materialized memories of ancestral banquets, and the aroma of melted chocolate formed spirals that told stories of loves lost through desserts forgotten by time. It was a place where each scent carried centuries of history, where recipes became eternal oaths, and where culinary lies simply couldn't exist. "Why did you bring me here?" Madalena asked, her voice echoing differently in the sacred space, each word amplified by ancestral salt crystals embedded in the walls. Lysander remained silent for long moments, walking slowly among ovens that had cooked for kings dead for millennia, and shelves filled with ingredients that had existed since before entire civilizations were founded. When he finally stopped before the central culinary altar, a monumental counter carved from a single block of black marble, where the most important recipes were prepared, his violet eyes reflected the eternal flames in a way that made them seem like windows to the soul. "Because I need you to completely understand what happened," he finally said, his voice carrying the weight of 5 centuries of guilt. "And because I'm tired of cooking only for ghosts and painful memories." The ancestral ovens began pulsing more intensely, responding to the emotional charge emanating from both. Madalena approached slowly, feeling the culinary magic of the place amplifying her own gastronomic intuition to a point where she could literally taste Lysander's emotions in the air: bitterness of loss, sweetness of happy memories, and a complex flavor she took a moment to identify as cautious hope. "The trauma I carry isn't just about losing Isabel," Lysander began, his emotional defenses finally crumbling completely. "It's about the fact that I forced her to pursue culinary perfection to the point of exposing herself to danger. Every dish she created for me needed to be more extraordinary than the previous one. Each flavor had to surpass the last gastronomic miracle. My thirst for excellence led her directly into death's arms." Madalena could see fragments of memory materializing in the aromatic vapors around them. Isabel, a woman of ethereal beauty, working frantically in the kitchen, her hands trembling with exhaustion while preparing increasingly elaborate dishes to impress an unmortal lover whose standards were literally impossible to achieve consistently. "Refinement became armor," he continued, his voice gaining a hypnotic quality that made even the eternal spices sing in harmony. "Demands became defense. Every impossible standard I established, every devastating criticism I offered, every moment of aristocratic coldness, all of it was to ensure that no chef would ever get close enough to sacrifice herself trying to achieve my approval." Madalena could feel the pain emanating from him like waves of heat that tasted of salty tears and smelled of shattered dreams. But she could also sense something more: a golden light pulsing within her, growing stronger with every word he spoke, as if her culinary soul were responding to a call for healing he didn't even know he was making. "But now you appear with this gastronomic purity that breaks all my defenses," he said, his voice breaking slightly with raw vulnerability. "And you begin awakening hungers I buried under centuries of empty perfection. You make me want to believe that maybe cuisine can be about nurturing instead of just impressing, about caring instead of just dominating." The silence that followed was filled only by the soft crackling of eternal flames and the melodic murmur of ancestral spices reacting to the emotional intensity of the moment. Madalena moved even closer, until she could feel his cold energy mixing with the warmth radiating from within her. creating an emotional alchemy that made the surrounding ingredients glow with golden light. "I don't know how to share a table anymore, Madalena," Lysander confessed, his voice reduced to a desperate whisper that echoed through all culinary dimensions connected to that sacred kitchen. 5 centuries of solitary dinners made me forget how to divide not just food, but the pleasure of cooking for someone you love. Madalena raised her hands, gently touching his face, feeling every line of millennial suffering carved into his aristocratic features. "Nobody knows," she said softly, her voice now carrying echoes of culinary power she didn't even know she possessed. "Eternity cooks together. And maybe you never needed a perfect chef. Maybe you needed someone who cooks with heart instead of just technique." When their lips finally met, it was as if all the flavors of the universe exploded in an impossible gastronomic symphony. The kiss wasn't gentle or hesitant, it was a fusion of hungers that had waited centuries to be satisfied. A mixture of sweetness and intensity that created completely new flavors. Madalena could taste eternity on his lips, bitter chocolate from past centuries, golden honey from future hopes, and something completely unique that was pure essence of rediscovered love. The ancestral ovens exploded in golden flames, and all ingredients around began glowing like edible stars. It was as if the sacred kitchen recognized it had finally witnessed the union that was always destined to happen to souls who had found their perfect flavor in each other. "Forever," Lysander promised against her lips. And for the first time in 5 centuries, the word sounded sweet instead of bitter. "Forever," Madalena agreed, knowing she had found not just her place in the world, but the ingredient that had been missing from all her life's recipes, a love that would season every dish with eternity. 15 years passed and the existence of Madalena and Lysander changed forever. Between the steam from ovens and the magic of ancestral recipes, they created a cuisine that grew with each served dish, transforming not only their own lives, but completely revolutionizing the gastronomy of the supernatural world. Madalena's coronation ceremony as royal chef of the Eternal Kingdom was an event that redefined 5 centuries of vampiric tradition. Held in the ancestral kitchen itself, but magically expanded to accommodate representatives from all known supernatural courts. The ceremony was conducted entirely through Flaversa, gastronomic symphony, where each served dish told part of Madalena's journey, from the humiliated baker to the culinary master who had conquered an ancestral lord's heart. She wore a crown made of crystallized spices that glowed with their own light, while Lysander, with violet eyes radiating pride instead of solitude, presented her to the supernatural world as his equal in all aspects, through salt and sugar, through fire and ice, through eternity and beyond. They swore in unison while sharing a goblet of wine seasoned with ingredients from 7 different dimensions. When Lysander placed the crown on her head, a new culinary era was born. The era of emotional gastronomy, where food became not just sustenance, but the purest form of communication between supernatural beings. The culinary revolution that followed was a phenomenon that changed the entire social structure of the vampiric world. Madalena implemented a gastronomic system where chefs of all origins, fat, thin, human, vampire, supernatural creatures of all forms, were judged exclusively by the passion and skill they put into their dishes. The concept of adequate appearance for cooks was completely abolished, replaced by the revolutionary philosophy that beauty is in flavor, and flavor comes from the heart. The Academy of Magical Cuisine they established became legendary in all supernatural realms. Located in a castle extension that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, the Academy attracted students from around the world, from young vampires who wanted to learn to cook something besides blood, 2 fantastic creatures who brought culinary traditions from cultures lost for millennia. Madalena developed a curriculum that combined supernatural techniques with gastronomic philosophy, teaching that true culinary mastery came from the ability to nourish souls, not just bodies. Lysander discovered that his union with Madalena had not only healed his secular trauma, but unlocked aspects of his vampiric personality that had been dormant for centuries. Together, they created a prosperous culinary kingdom that extended through parallel dimensions, a place where chefs rejected by their societies found not just acceptance, but celebration of their differences. Vampires who had forgotten how to feel pleasure through food rediscovered gastronomic joy, while creatures who lived on specialized diets learned to diversify their palates through culinary magic. Madalena developed gastronomic powers that rivaled the most ancient magical artifacts. She could heal emotional traumas through specific dishes, restore lost memories through ancestral flavors, and even modify physical appearances through culinary potions that worked from the inside out. Her school of self-esteem through cuisine became world famous, teaching that true beauty came from confidence, and confidence could be cultivated through mastering something you loved to do. But the sweetest poetic justice came when they returned to Whitestone, now traveling in a royal carriage, escorted by noble vampires, to inaugurate the first branch of the Academy of Magical Cuisine in Immortal City. Madalena, now radiant with royal power and supernatural confidence, found the town exactly as she had left it, small, prejudiced, and trapped in its own limitations. Donna Francisca, now older, and even more bitter, almost fainted when she recognized the fat baker who now commanded the respect of supernatural nobles. "Madalena," she stammered, her voice trembling with incredulity. "But how, you weren't. You didn't have." "I always had it," Madalena responded with elegance that made Queen seem plebeian. "You just chose to see only what you wanted to see." Her revenge wasn't cruel or violent, it was transformative. She established a scholarship program specifically for young people rejected for their appearances, offering them the opportunity to discover their talents in environments where they were valued for their abilities instead of judged by their bodies. Junior, the mayor's son who had led her humiliation in the square, discovered that his own daughter had been born with a disability that made her a target of bullying at school. When he came begging for help, Madalena not only accepted the child into her academy, but used the situation as a life lesson about how cruelty always returns to teach us empathy. The bullying cycle was completely broken when the academy's presence transformed Whitestone into a center of gastronomic diversity. Chefs of all shapes, sizes, and origins came to establish restaurants in the city, bringing economic prosperity and, more importantly, a cultural revolution that taught residents that true wealth came from variety, not uniformity. Beaumont, now executive chef of the Academy, observed everything with paternal satisfaction. In 5 centuries serving this house, he frequently commented in his elegant French, "I have never seen the kitchens sing so much with joy as they sing now." The castle, once echoing only with the lonely clinking of plates being served for one, now resonated with a symphony of laughter, animated conversations of students discussing culinary techniques, and the comforting sound of multiple kitchens functioning simultaneously. The gardens where they had walked during their first romantic approach grew into a magical farm where impossible ingredients flourished side by side, each plant representing a recipe that had united hearts instead of just nourishing bodies. The ancestral kitchen where they had declared themselves became a pilgrimage sanctuary for supernatural couples, a place where other unlikely loves came seeking gastronomic blessings for their unions. Each dish prepared there carried the energy of a love that had overcome prejudice, insecurities, and centuries of trauma. In that castle that once knew only empty banquets and cold formalities, now echoed laughter around abundant tables and conversations seasoned with true love. The love that seemed impossible to bloom between rejection and sophistication flourished and grew, showing that even the hungriest hearts can find satisfaction, as long as one has the courage to season life with acceptance, and discover that sometimes being different is just the first ingredient in the recipe for creating something extraordinary.